Good morning.
Hi.
For Hero.
Okay. Can you give me a thumbs up if this sounds okay? Yep, okay. Just checking. Okay, so OTC, I'm sorry, I missed that one part. I know that said, and then from Hero, we have Director Jensen.
Yes. And OTC will be a combination of Cassie, Johnson, Joe, I believe Christian and Amanda, but they can introduce themselves as they attack the presentation.
I can't hear anything.
Oh God, not again.
Uh-oh.
Hello, Director Jensen. Hello, Chief Axtell. Thanks for being here today.
Hello, council members. Hope you're having a good morning.
I decided to wear white pants today, not because it matters on Shoulders Up video, but because it's summer. And I'm not ready to throw in the towel quite yet. I heard an ominous sound from the control room that they couldn't hear anything. We get a check in on that so we can get started. Of course, they can't hear that. Thanks, Val. I saw you laughing at least. That's the hard part. My efforts of humor go lost on this silent crowd. Except for I laugh at myself.
I was laughing hysterically. I just
had that picture of yourself looking somber. Okay, so I'm wondering if we can use chat. We are ready to roll, but I want to make sure we're good.
We are good to go.
Okay, excellent. All right. The chat function actually is probably supposed to be shut off. Okay, I see my colleagues in the House and directors and folks here to present as well. So we will call the City of St. Paul City Council budget meeting to order. Good morning. It is 10:03. We have a huge agenda today in advance of our required max levy that we are setting today. The intention is to set it today. I think we have a little bit of wiggle room on that if we are unable to reach a number. But the intention is to set our max levy today, which we've been trying to call the levy limit. So it doesn't sound like we're trying to max it out, but instead we're setting a limit with which we will work for the remainder of this budget year. I'm getting a message that the chief is having a little, some issues with audio, so he's working on that. But we are hearing today from the police department, from our technology, and also from Hero. And I will give, the agenda has the police going first. I'll give them just a minute here to get the audio going, but I do see that Director Jensen's ready to rock and roll. So if, just in the spirit of keeping things on time, if we can't get audio on the chief in a moment or two here, we will skip ahead to Ms. Jensen if that works.
I'm sorry, I can't hear a thing.
Oh, we can hear
you hear
you.
me?
Yep.
I can't hear you.
Okay. Did you change earpieces? Hairpieces.
Okay, I'm gonna log out here and try from a different route to see if that works. I'm very sorry.
The sound I'm getting is really bad. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. And it sounds fine.
Well, you're not sounding very good, so I'm not sure what that is. I've shut everything off on my computer. It's very, Holly, can you talk and so I can see if it's.
Good morning, council members. This is Holly.
Okay. I'm getting, yours breaks up, Amy. I'm not
Mine's
sure.
breaking up. Is it breaking up for everybody or just?
Why
Not for
would
me.
my computer not be working?
Is it breaking up?
No, it's not breaking up for us.
Okay, so it must be on my end.
Councilmember Brennan, there's
Yes.
there's a note in the chat that says from Susan Earl that says just a heads up from the budget team watching, the stream isn't up.
Council President Brennan, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if I should break in or not, but I'm just getting messages from my team that it's not, the stream isn't on, that they're not in this meeting, but watching, and it's not streaming yet.
Are folks in the control room hearing that? We have called the meeting to order, so it should be streaming if it's supposed to be streaming.
This is the control room. It's an issue with the Granicus streaming company that we're trying to resolve.
All right. I'm hearing from Ward 4 staff that the stream is on, working and rolling.
Great, thank you. I'll make sure that my team knows. Thank you.
Yeah, he's sending some technical advice, but I'm not. Just maybe refresh the browser. Okay, I'm gonna make a request here to the assistant chief. Okay, so just we're going to move ahead with Hero because Ms. Jensen is ready to go and we're having technical difficulties with the police. I realize that this will could be a scheduling challenge on the back end, but we do need to get started as we have a really dense agenda. Oh,
I'm here. I'm very sorry.
That's all right.
I just had to log on to a different computer. For some reason, my microphone wasn't working on the other one. I couldn't hear you guys.
Okay, well, all right, then we'll do an about face here, and we have so just rolling again. We are hearing today from the police department, from Hero, from OTC. We have 90 minutes to get through all of this dense material in advance of our levy limit, which we will set today at the 3:30 meeting, all things being equal. So we are going to start out with the police department, and I will do my best to keep us on time. So we welcome Chief Axtell with the presentation and time for Q&A. I want to acknowledge to the police and to Hero and OTC that I know there are lots of folks that are tuned in support of the work that you're doing. The command staff is usually sitting in the front row when the police comes and does its budget, and of course today they're watching online, and so that is a different feel, and I think the same is true with Hero and OTC. So we acknowledge folks that are watching and supporting and have got this budget presentation and budget planning to the point it is at, and welcome them on the live stream or later recorded until we are back in the council chambers. That's how things are going to roll. But we do appreciate the work and the support that's in the ether here today. So I'm going to turn things over to the chief. And again, my job is just going to be to try to keep you to a half hour. with the questions and presentation so that we can get through our full agenda. So thank you so much for being here today. We look forward to hearing from you, Chief Axtell.
Council President, council members, thank you very much. I'm very sorry for the technical difficulties on my end this morning. This presentation will actually take 15 minutes or possibly less. So I'll get right off the start here with slide 2. You can take a look at the fact the City Council has requested a brief update on the 2020 budget and how it has changed from the adopted budget. This slide depicts an overview of the department changes to the adopted budget. At Mayor Carter's request, the department has adjusted to contribute a little more than $1 million back to the city to help balance the 2020 budget. Additionally, we have carefully tracked our COVID costs following the guidelines provided by OFS, and we believe we qualify for more than $2.5 million in CARES Act funding. When you factor all of this into our budget, as of today, barring any other significant events in our community, and the mayor's office reimburses our department for the CARES Act money, we project that we will land the department on budget for 2020. This is something we're very proud of, considering all of the extra costs related to civil unrest so far this year. Moving into the 2021 budget.
Chief, I know you're rolling on a presentation and a timeline, but before you move off 2020, and my colleagues and I are really working hard to try to separate the 2 years when we're talking about our budget. So I want to make sure that I ask this before we move into 2021. But the second major bullet point says cancel the 2020 Police Academy $200,000, and I'm wondering if that is the cost of the academy or if that's the cost of hiring the police after the academy. What is $200,000 for?
Council President, thank you for that question. The $200,000 would be the approximate amount of money for the salary for the new police officers once the academy starts. Depending on the size of the academy, I believe that that number was estimated at 17. So if that number was less than 17, that number would come down. That's for the rest of 2020. And then every year after that, there would be approximately $100,000 per employee.
Okay. And thank you for clarifying that. I think when I see cancel the 2020 Police Academy, and my thought is, it's $200,000 to run a police academy, when in fact it's the cost of running the police academy isn't as much as paying the officers once they're hired for the remainder of the year.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. So slide 3, moving into the 2021 budget. This slide is an overview of the police department, and it makes up, as you can see, 19% of the entire city budget. Slide 4 shows that when you consider only the general fund, the police department budget makes up 33% of that spending. Of course, and as it should be, we do not count on significant revenue for our budget, which is why we are mostly dependent on the general fund.
Chief, I'm sorry. Once again, I missed that Mr. Tao and Ms. Prince both have a hand up. So I apologize for that. I'm still getting acquainted with my new computer. So if we could just go to Mr. Tao and Ms. Prince before we move forward. Mr. Tao?
Thank you, Council President. Chief, thank you for your budget presentation here. Going back to slide 2, you talked about right there, $2.5 million from the CARES Act, and then there you put if. Underscore there, and so I'm just curious if, as in the feds would allow that, or can you explain that piece?
Yes, thank you very much, Councilmember Tao. We have looked at the guidelines under the CARES Act provided by OFS, and we believe that we have over $2.591 million in reimbursable money that would be reimbursed by the feds through the state emergency management. So in talking with Commissioner Harrington, Public Safety Commissioner Harrington, we feel very confident that we would qualify for that reimbursement to the department to help us become on budget this year due to the extraordinary year that we've had.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Ms. Prince?
Yes, and I'm on that same slide, Chief. And actually, I have the same question, but I guess I would address it to Mr. McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy, I'm assuming, I hope correctly, that all the work that was done to determine what was CARES Act reimbursable will be reimbursed to all the departments that have those reimbursable expenses for 2020. Am I right about that?
Council President Bremo and Councilmember Prince, we are working for a full package on CARES spending that we're planning to have agenda ready for you next week, and we'll be scheduling briefings with you and all of your colleagues so that we can walk through that plan. But your question around staff reimbursements, that's a big part of the plan, but there are also lots of other needs across the city that we want to make sure we're maximizing those resources to cover. So we did look at our incurred costs for direct COVID response, including the public safety responses, as well as other departments, and we are planning to reimburse a substantial amount of those costs so that we are able to cover that staff that was substantially redeployed to things that were different from how we had originally budgeted them. For this year.
That is a really big question for me, because we will be voting on $293,000 of CARES Act money for the mayor's pilot. If we are not going to be using this money for reimbursable deficit reduction, I need to know that before I'm able to vote on today's item about the pilot project. I just want to say that, because it was my understanding that we were, that we did all of that accounting from all the departments so that when that federal money became available, it would be used to cover our own expenses. Does that mean that the 2.5 million that's qualifying here is likely not going to be completely reimbursed?
Council President Bremo and Councilmember Prince agreed that we have been working to maximize those resources to cover our costs that are eligible that would help with our deficit. We have to be very careful with the grant guidelines on what is eligible, and it's very specific that costs that were already in the budget cannot be reimbursed. So we have to make sure that they are covering costs that are substantially different from what we budgeted them for this year. And we've been working really closely with a grant consultant to make sure we're tracking things that are eligible and only submitting for those things that are eligible. The specific number of about the 2.5 or 2.6 million here that the police are tracking, I think that's consistent with the number that we're tracking as well. I don't have that directly in front of me this minute, but I can make sure that I can provide the numbers that we are tracking related to police, fire, parks, several other departments that will be reimbursing our costs. And that is a substantial piece of what we're planning to use the CARES dollars for.
Okay, well,
those eligible costs.
Thank you for that. And any information you can get us on that reimbursable stuff before today's vote on the pilot project would be helpful.
Great, will do.
And Mr. McCarthy, just sometimes I get lost in all the other words. If I think I heard you correctly saying that your numbers and the police numbers are pretty similar in terms of reimbursable care.
Council President Bremo, without having it directly in front of me right at this second, my recollection is that our numbers are very close to that same 2.6 number that they're tracking on this slide here.
Okay, and I think that's it's worth restating. It's just maybe it's not 91492, but we're close, and so that is it's not like a 0 or 2.5 million, which is a huge. That's different. So I appreciate the clarification, and I appreciate the question from Ms. Prince and the request for follow up.
Right, all right, and just to one additional point on that, Council President Bremo and Councilmember Prince, that this provides, as Council Member Prince indicated, this is budget and deficit reduction. So this helps our 2020 picture by moving this cost and this budget to the grant budget from the police department. So we would be, the actual budget action that would be in front of you next week would move this spending out of the police department and into the coronavirus relief fund budget. So it's effectively reducing the spending and budget from the police department and moving it to this other fund. So in that way, it helps the 2020 budget picture.
Okay, great. Does that answer your question, Ms. Prince? I see your hand still up.
I think it does. I'm confused by that last thing that you said, John. Could you explain that again? It's 2020 deficit reduction.
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Prince, that's exactly right. It's 2020 deficit reduction. So the way that works is by moving the budget and the spending out of the police department's budget into the coronavirus budget. So it's effectively, taking all of those costs and that budget out of the police department and putting it into the coronavirus relief fund budget. And that's the only way that that's the way that it works as deficit reduction, is by moving that spending out of their general fund and into the grant fund.
All right. So, Ms. Prince, in other words, instead of moving it into the police, they move those charges into the CARES fund. But we can delve into that a bit more. But Ms. Prince, if it's okay with you, I'd like to move on to 2021. We're really short on time.
Need to follow up on that, John.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chief.
All right, thank you. Yeah, just follow up on that last comment. To take money out of our department would put us over budget. We've spent more than $3 million in just protest costs this year out of our control. So I don't know how we would move money out of our general fund budget at the same time. We'd be way over budget. So we'll talk about that later. I guess I have to learn more about that as well. That's news to me. So slide 5 shows general fund of our department makes up 86% of the police department's budget. The remaining 14% consists of grants, billed services, and some enterprise like the impound lot, and these are our special funds. Again, it's important to note that the department does not rely on any action-based revenue to balance its budget, meaning we don't receive funds for tickets we write or arrests we make. As always, the budget book can be overwhelming and confusing, so I will explain the 2021 budget changes to the department the best I possibly can. Our adopted 2020 budget was just north of $105 million. To operate the same department in 2021, the cost would be just north of $108 million. And I've highlighted these numbers for you on the slide. This is primarily due to the wage growth, but also the 7 SROs were moved into the general fund when the school district ended its contract with the city. Now, there are some minor reductions, but the department cost is a little more than $3 million more in 2021. The reason I'm highlighting this is because the budget book shows an $801,000 reduction, but that number is only the net between the 2020 adopted budget and the mayor's proposed 2021 budget. It does not account for the actual reduction of funded line items. The reduction to the department is, in fact, a little more than $3.8 million. Moving on to slide 7 shows an itemized list of changes for our budget in 2021. The authorized strength was reduced from 630 to 620. This was made up from a reduction of the 7 SROs and 3 sergeants in the technology unit for our department. It also adds $2.2 million in attrition to the department that we must carry. This means the department must accrue $3.7 million in savings to the police department to balance our budget. We do this by holding open police officer positions and not hiring. How many? We just don't know. $3.7 million is the equivalent of 31 police officer positions. And if they were all vacant by January 1st, 2021, but we know that won't be the case, it will be much more by the end of 2021 without hiring. We're also reducing 3 PEOs and 4 other civilian support positions. And I suspect there are questions about what that means for staffing and services, and I will discuss this over the next few slides. Slide 8, at a very high level, slide 8 shows the department's sworn staffing history and changes when they occurred going back to 2007. Slide 9 is the same slide you just saw with one data point added. It shows the 2021 projected staffing level with a $3.7 million salary attrition that's required to balance our budget. This is a conservative.
Why just 2021? We know that in every single year that light blue number is significantly lower than the dark blue bar.
Well, because I'm projecting what the factor is going to be for 2021, because the $3.7 million in attrition is much more than we've ever experienced.
Okay, well, I would like to request that we see this slide with the light blue lines for 2007 to 2021 for context.
Absolutely, Council President. Thank you. We'll provide that to you.
Thank you.
So when it shows the 2021 projected staffing level with the $3.7 million salary attrition to balance the budget factored in. And again, this is a conservative estimate. It accounts for 24 separations. The average number of separations was 31 during the years 2014 through 2019. And I know all the departments accrue salary savings throughout the year, and the savings can be factored into our budget. However, at $3.7 million, we are essentially reducing the strength of the department further. The 2020 budget, the 2020 Academy, was cut as part of balancing the 2020 budget. And with an increase in our attrition rate, I don't know if we will have funding for a 2021 Academy. And even if we have an Academy in late 2021, by the time we hire and train these officers, we will be far lower than this estimate. By the time officers from the fall of 2021 Academy would be ready for deployment, would bring us to May or June of 2022. We need to remember that $3.7 million is equivalent to 31 police officer salaries. We will be staffed to a level of pre-2007. This is when a time our population was 279,000. A time when the city had no light rail, no soccer stadium. Crime was much different, as we had 16 homicides that year. And downtown was certainly much more different than it is today. I have another staffing slide coming up that will help us visually break this down. You'll see on slide 10, shows some expected impacts to service. We know that there's already more work than we can adequately handle. Last year, we received more 9/11 calls than any time in our city's history. This year, we're on pace to surpass last year by a couple thousand calls. Reducing our strength will have direct outcomes. At a time when police departments have no margin for error, I am certainly concerned about this. The department is already consistently adjusting to meet the service demands to help us confront changing crime trends, service demand levels, and adjusting our deployment based on our available staff. In recent years, you've watched as I have eliminated the motors unit, mounted unit, and recently closed the force unit to become more efficient and to help keep up with our ever-evolving demands for service. What is not depicted is the amount of work that we have related to demonstrations and protests. As a matter of fact, just last week alone, there were 9 events that required support from our officers and our special operations unit. We all know we're the capital city, and we have the responsibility to ensure that everyone can safely exercise their First Amendment rights. Slide 11. I'm concerned about the delivery of our service and the capacity to deliver that service. This reminds us of the work that we've been doing with our LECPA and the diversification of our department. As you remember, last year, we had an academy with 77% diversity, the most diversity in the history of our police department as a result of the investments over the last many years in our LECPA program. Unfortunately, in August, we released 8 LECPA students in the 2020 cohort that were slated for our fall academy. I know they're looking for and receiving offers from other departments, as I am in contact with each and every one of these students. These students were a part of our family here for 3 years. Between the LECPA program, PEO, and CLO, we had 13 quality, diverse candidates ready to go for our 2020 academy. And unfortunately, we're going to lose them all.
Chief, before
Yeah.
you move on, Ms. Jalali and Ms. Naker both had their hands up. So why don't we go to Ms. Jalali and then Ms. Naker?
Thank you. My question relates to a couple slides ago, looking at trends in sworn strength over time. I'm interested to know, looking at that graph between 2010 and 2019, we steadily added officers to our sworn strength. There were 25 over that time period, and I'm looking for whether there's a meaningful impact on reducing crime data over that time period that you know of.
Councilmember Jalali, thank you very much for that question, and I can provide specific crime stats for each of those years. From the top of my head, I believe that violent crime actually reduced over many of those years, but we will get you the specific information by the end of the day on each of those categories. But I think it's important to note that our community and the residents grew exponentially during those years, as well as businesses and soccer stadiums and whatnot moved into our city.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would like a follow-up on that data. That would be helpful. And I think that it's important to be mindful to, as members of the audience and the general public are watching this, and as we're making decisions, I think conflating demands on 911 with amount of actual crime, making false correlations between the sworn strength and then whether or not crime is being reduced, all that data is important to parse accurately and with the correct causal implications. So that's some of the reason behind my questioning. Normal population growth does mean there will just be more people calling 911. It's not necessarily indicative of actual amounts of crime happening. I think it's important to have a clear sense of all those numbers. So thank you for that, and I'll let other folks ask their questions.
Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. Thank you, Chief. Just going back also a couple of slides, you had mentioned something about if we do not have another police academy in 2021. I just wanted to clarify, the budget right now does contemplate having a police academy next year. Is that right?
Thank you very much, Councilmember Naker. No, the budget that I'm looking at right now would not facilitate the 2021 academy. The salary isn't in my budget to allow me at this point to hire a 2021 academy.
So going back to Council President Brenmoen's question earlier about holding the academy versus hiring the officers, are you saying dollars aren't there to actually hire officers coming out of the academy, and therefore we couldn't hold one even if we were intending to hire them then in 2022? I'm just wondering about that because there's a long delay, obviously, between when the academy finishes and when we can actually bring officers on board. And if we had the budget to bring those officers on board in 2022, would we have the budget to actually hold the class in 2021? Does that make sense?
Yes, Councilmember Naker, thank you for your question. Right now, the way it stands, with the increase in attrition going up to $3.7 million, I have to reduce $3.7 million in salary savings before I can hire a police officer in 2021. Which means people have to leave before there's enough money to hire a 2021 academy. That can't happen under the current structure unless we have $3.7 million in salary savings.
So just, Council President, with your permission, one follow-up. So Are you anticipating then that in the current projection, you're saying we will not have an academy this year, we would not have an academy next year, and then we would try to have an academy in early 2022, and the earliest we'd be able to bring those officers on board would be mid-2022? Is that what you're projecting?
With Councilmember Naker, thank you again for the question. It's just right now with $3.7 million in attrition that we would have to get to, there's just no path that I see at this point to make that up in 2021. However, if it did happen earlier in the year where enough officers left to bridge that gap, then we could have a 2021 fall academy. But at this point, with the record of retirements that I've looked at over the last many years, if that number stays steady, it's going to be nearly impossible to meet the $3.7 million in salary savings.
So how long would it be before we had another police academy?
That would be up to the mayor and the council and OFS when they would allow me to hire people.
Okay, thanks.
And again, I suppose that is supposing that the only cuts that are possible are these attrition salary savings, and that there's no other potential cuts in the police department that could make up some of that gap. Simply no other cut.
Council President Brendan, thank you for that question. You know, as we look at our budget in the department, we have approximately $400,000 in discretionary funding each year, and those costs cover everything from target paper to toilet paper for the department, to just kind of run the nuts and bolts of the department. Everything else is, you know, when you look at our budget, $5 million goes to the comm center. All of our expenses, for the most part, are contractual. You know, we need squad cars. We need to put gas in the squad cars. It takes a lot of money to operate a department this size. So, you know, we could cut, you know, squad cars, but, you know, in the long run, what happens then is you have a huge deficit to make up a few years down the road. We've learned that lesson in the past, that if we make cuts, all of a sudden, you know, down the road, we have to scramble to come up with significant amounts of money, which have shown in my history that require tax increases to make up for those foreseen circumstances.
Right. That of course is the same with every department. We had a similar discussion with Public Works and kicking the can down the road with our road construction as well. We understand what when you defer these costs, what happens later down the road. So that's the challenge that we're facing. And my question is sincere, and our job, of course, over the next few months, will be looking at some of those. You know, what are the potential other cuts? You know, is there a unit? Is there something that can be iced for a year or two? These are challenging conversations to have, and we're having these same challenging conversations with every department. And so we hear you, and we're also balancing that against you know, managing the levy for the community as a whole, including our renters, including our business owners and industry. And so, you know, when you keep reciting $3.7 million and calling it cuts to officers, I just want to, you know, ask at the end of this presentation, like, do you think we should raise our levy to cover that cost? Or do you think we should cut something from another department? And I would appreciate your thoughts on that before we close here today.
Council President, thank you very much for that question. You know, as I look at what we've done within our department, I don't wait for budget emergencies to make sure that we're running an efficient department. It wasn't during a budget emergency where I cut the mounted and motors unit and the force unit, because we needed to meet the demands of our community, and the demands have changed. As far as cutting other departments or raising taxes, it's my job as your police chief under the city charter to tell you what's going on within our department and my best estimate as to what's needed to protect our community. As far as raising taxes or what core city services should be funded is an elected position to make those determinations. At the end of the day, my budget is my budget, and I will do everything I possibly can with whatever dollar amount that I get to make sure that we are supporting our community and fielding a police department that reflects the values of our entire community.
Yep, and we will make that decision. I was just looking for your opinion. We can move on.
Thank you. Slide 12 brings us back to the staffing level discussion one more time to help us visualize the department staffing. As you will see, it shows 3 data points about our staffing. 1, the gold line shows the department's official authorized strength. 2, the light blue bar shows the predicted staffing levels as we move through 2021. 3, the dark blue bar shows the predicted staffing level we are actually able to respond to calls for service, investigate crimes, engage our community, and work towards preventing crimes. With no 2020 Academy, we will if we have one again in late 2021, we'll fall below the published authorized strength. And again, it takes 8 months to get our officers up and running from the start of the academy. We've discussed it before, but just as a reminder, the department averages approximately 30 officers we're able to deploy than what's on the roster. When you factor the loss of non-deployable officers, by the end of 2021, we will be fielding approximately 52 less police officers than the published authorized strength. The next slide is going to show an additional clarity related to the difference between staff on payroll versus our deployable personnel. So slide 13, there are several factors that accrue in the average of 30. We have police officers who are honorably serving our armed forces. In fact, today we have 7 St. Paul police officers deployed serving our country. Police officers raise families and are eligible for the same benefits offered to all of our city employees. We have employees who are injured on the job, who are not able to work as police officers as they recover, and there are other administrative reasons why officers cannot be deployed. This last factor does not include employee vacation time, short-term sick, or training time, and that would be on top of the 30. Based on the current funding of the department, considering the official reduction of 10 positions in the authorized strength and the $3.7 million in attrition, I am concerned about keeping up with the community needs. Slide 14, in 2017, the council asked for a police staffing study and provided then Mayor Coleman a funding for this project. The project and the funding was never executed, as you know. In 2019, again, the council asked for a staffing study. I adjusted our department so that Commander Dr. Jack Sarir could conduct the study. That report was published at the end of 2019 and utilized a series of peer-supported methodologies. Slide 14 lists some of the documented recommendations of that study. Now, I have no illusion that the city can afford an additional 101 employees for the department. But this is data that should be at the front of our minds as we're thinking about all the time that went into that study. Moving on to slide 15.
Chief, before you move on, I see Mr. Tolbert and Ms. Naker both have hands up. So let's start with Mr. Tolbert and then go on to Ms. Naker.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm probably going to take us back a couple of slides. My hand was up from previous things. I do want to maybe engage a little bit more on Council President Brenmoen's question regarding alternative cuts and cost savings rather than officers on the streets. And that's obviously a decision. You're the chief, and you know where it's better to invest in than we might. What are these other considerations, and how much cost savings can you have, knowing that we might need to make a big investment in vehicles or other things at a later time, so that we don't have to have these sworn officer reductions that your budget's proposing?
Councilmember Tolbert, thank you very much for your question. Again, as we look at our department's discretionary spending, it lists about $405,090 out of the $104,738,000. There are a lot of things that go into running a police department, and the equipment that's needed, the support and the training that's needed, the supervision that's needed. Sometimes, not everybody understands that what is monitored is managed, and you need strong supervision, especially in today's day and age in policing in America, making sure that the quality standards of what's expected of our police officers is being upheld, making sure that the support for victims of crime is there when we have members of our community who are victimized by crime, and it does cost a lot of money. We could certainly make one-time cuts to items like squad cars, for example, but our budget for that is approximately, to the best of my recollection, $1 million a year for squad cars. If you cut maybe 20 squad cars, we're again running up the miles on our older squad cars. We have higher maintenance needs. So there's always cost tails for every decision we make, but we certainly continue to engage in any specific questions that you'd have about specific items in our department for cuts. And again, I am constantly, the community expects that I constantly analyze every unit in our department to make sure that it's not an outdated resource that is not needed anymore, which is why I have, unfortunately cut our motors and our mounted unit. Everybody loved the horses, but it just didn't, it didn't line up with the core services that the police department has to provide to our community. And those are the difficult decisions that have been made. A majority of the non-salary is contracts that we have to make, like I mentioned earlier, $5 million to the Emergency Communication Center, the body-worn camera, which costs a lot of money, the utility bills and the fuel. At the end of the day, really, there's about $400,000 there. And if you take that, that's four officers for 1 year without any money to continue to hire them after year one.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, the cost of training and everything has gone up. The thing I've been trying to legitimately square my mind around with this budget and previous budget, maybe you can go back to slide 9. Thank you. That's the sworn officers page, right? I believe. Police staffing with salary, sworn strength history. And going back and looking at past budgets that we've had, in 2014, and I know inflation and there's other costs there, but in 2014, the adopted police budget was about $84.5 million. In 2017, it was $91 million. In 2018, it was $95 million. In 2019, it was $100 million. In 2020, it was $105 million. And this proposal is for $104.5 million, the mayor's proposal. And that's just a drastic. So this would be above 2019 numbers, below 2020 numbers legitimately, but above 2020 numbers and way above the staffing gets equal to 2010. Back then it was below 78 million, I'm assuming, or 75 million. I'm just trying to square all these numbers because that's a lot of different money things. And I'm just wondering, are we making different choices, and why is the sworn numbers the ones really taking the heat when the budget has just continuously increased every year by approximately $5 million?
Council member Tolbert, that's a very legitimate question, and I appreciate you asking me. Here's one example. If our department, knowing that 90% of our budget, as you see, is salary, right? So 90%. So if our department gets a 3% cost of living raise, we're nearly a $3 million increase every year just in cost of living, contractual obligations to our police officers, like every other city department gets cost of living. So that number goes up. It's deceiving, like we have extra money to buy extra squad cars. No, that's salary that goes up every year. Additionally, the Emergency Communication Center costs have gone up over the years. For example, nearly $500,000 has been added to our budget for the community ambassadors. Those are things that get added to our budget that show up on our budget sheet that, make it look like we're sitting in a lot of money here. But the fact of the matter, that's not true. It's not accurate.
So I think it would be helpful if we could get a easy to read chart that kind of has those different buckets, because that's what I'm trying to square my mind around with, trying to explain to folks on this, like why would it be such a dramatic drop? And it's not to deny costs don't go up. Every department has costs go up, and there's increases in salaries and things like that. It's a dramatic drop for the budget, and I'm just trying to make sure we're giving you, that the discretionary choices being made are correct. So I'm sure we can get other people have questions, but any follow-up?
Councilmember, thank you very much. And I think I'm really glad you brought that up, because you could show a $4 million increase in our department that is 100% salary contractual increases by the union within the department and all of our employees. So I'm really glad you brought that up because it is deceiving.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Naker.
Thank you, Council President. Two quick questions, Chief, also taking us back this time to slide 13. I think what everyone is kind of trying, what I hear my colleagues getting at and what I know my constituents want to know, and you said this earlier, is that getting past the many different numbers, which can be very confusing with a budget, any budget, and especially a complicated one like yours, to figure out what does it actually mean on the street. And so actually, I guess I meant slide 12. So looking at those numbers, you have 3 different data points here. I remember when we had this conversation last year, we talked about how even the lower, darker blue bar that represents the deployable officers, that number is also much higher, I think almost twice as high as the number of officers who are actually on patrol at any given time. And I don't remember, but it would be great for you to talk a little bit to like, what's the number of actual bodies on the street compared to possible deployable? Because I think that's different. And maybe to see on this chart how that changes over time. And then I'm just going to throw my next question at you and right away, just to be efficient here. The other question was just how were the decisions made about which positions to eliminate? And I'm specifically wondering about the parking enforcement officers. We've talked many times about how we have not nearly enough parking enforcement for a city our size. And I'm just wondering if those are just because they were already vacant and they're being left vacant, or if there were intentional decisions made to eliminate there versus somewhere else.
Thank you, Councilmember Naker. The decisions of what positions to cut it's my number one goal to keep as many boots on the ground, frontline officers as possible to meet the ever increasing demands for 9/11 service from our community members. So that's how the recommendations came from us were made. It's nice to have parking enforcement officers. They help in many ways, and it helps as a feeder program for our department, but having an officer available to answer an in-progress domestic assault is much more important in my eyes than having an officer available to handle a parking complaint. And I might have missed the second part of your question, I'm sorry.
Just the previous question was about how the number of deployable officers relates to the number of officers actually on the street. Because I remember we were talking about this and it was like in the 200s last year.
Yes, Councilmember Naker, it's approximately 250 to 260 officers in each of the, not each of the districts, in all of the districts, 80 to 90, one of the districts, maybe 100, including investigative staff in each of the districts. So we have 3 shifts every day on the street. We have minimal standards for officers who are working. So boots on the ground, approximately 240 throughout the city in the 3 districts. And then, as you know, it's not just answering the 911 call. You have to follow up with investigations, follow up with our ever increasing shots fired in the gun and gang unit to keep up with all of those issues, and our coast unit. Now, we don't count the coast unit officers who are deploying, co-responding with our social workers, but we consider them as a frontline resource as well, but they happen to not be in a district.
Thanks. Just to close, I think it would be great if you could provide us with that as a follow-up, Chief, just the number of actual officers on patrol at any time over the same period of time in this graph.
Councilmember Naker, yes, we will absolutely do that.
Thank you.
And I think Dr. Commander Surveyor had some of that information, and so it would be easy to pull out and share that out. I appreciate the question as well.
Okay, so thank you. So moving on, I just have one more page here. Moving on to slide 15, we're continuing to evaluate how we can meet service demands with significantly reduced staff. We're prioritizing services and working to balance response to the calls with other activities like officer training and engagement. And I'll present this further when we have the opportunity to meet next month. The last thing I want to do is deploy a department that only responds to calls, and I think that's really important to call out. As you know, we have all of us spent more than 4 years refocusing our department to be an agency our community deserves today and into the future. I know that the city is facing and the department is facing historically challenging budget circumstances. I also know that I lead a passionate and committed public servants who represent the police department that is years ahead of those around our country. And as always, it's my duty and commitment to each and every one of you and all of our citizens that whatever budget that we receive, we're going to do everything we possibly can to keep everyone in our community safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. I see several of my colleagues' hands up, and I do just want to say that we bopped around with questions during a slide that I want to really pull out and highlight as a personal interest, and that is, we have been asking to look to recruit and hire a police force that looks like our city. And the LECPA program is a program that I very much support, that Ward 5 and particularly my legislative aide, Hua Jung Kim, has done a great job engaging with. Just this week alone, we have taken them out door knocking in the Rice and Winnipeg neighborhood to invite people to a community conversation about public safety. They went willingly and happily to go meet with people and speak with them in first language. We had them help us, again, door knocking to get people to a food distribution open market, and had 180 families turn out because a trusted voice knocked on their door. And then afterwards, the LECPA went and played soccer with a bunch of kids from the Karen Football Association, and they're changing the way that people look at our police, and they're changing the way the police look. And I just want to really say that I know I was listening to Ms. Naker's questions and asking questions about the cost of a police academy. I don't want to lose these trainees, these dedicated people in this challenging year. So I just want to say that out loud and to my colleagues, so they know that it is a priority of mine to continue moving forward with this talented group of people, something that we have asked the police to do and they have delivered on. And so I just want to make that point. I'm going to move to Ms. Prince, then Mr. Tao, then Ms. Jalali.
Council President Brenmone, I share your commitment to the LECPA program for every reason that you gave. I have asked the chief if it might be possible to do an academy just for those students, a small academy that would coincidentally be 100% diverse. So that is something that maybe he can speak to, or we can take up later. But what I want to clarify, when Council Member Tolbert asked the question about what are things in the police budget that that we could look at to cut. And one concern I have, and this may be a question for Mr. McCarthy, but when the mayor created the 3 chiefs positions in his department, the resiliency, innovation, and equity chiefs, who I believe now are in various states of maybe being vacant or handled in a different way. But it's my understanding that those salaries were paid for by assessments to each of our departments. And my recollection last year, I think it was about 100,000 of the police department budget that was being used to pay that for those positions in the mayor's office. Mr. McCarthy, could you clarify that? Because I do think we need to look at that issue, especially in that the equity chief is vacant right now, and the innovations chief, I believe, is being done by a lower level employee.
Council President Brenmone, Council Member Prince, I'm going to refer that question to Budget Manager Susan Earle, who's also on the call. So, Ms. Earle, would you please take that question?
Ms. Earle, if you're talking, you may have your mute on.
shoot, I did have my mute on. Thank you. Council President Brenman and Council Member Prince, I don't have the specific number for the allocation to the police department in front of me, but we can certainly get that information to you. But you're correct. It is an allocation that's out to departments to partially pay for those 3 positions, but that's not the full funding source for those. But we can certainly send that breakdown.
Okay, I would like to see that. I don't know, Chief, do you know what the amount is in your department?
Councilmember Prince, thank you. I believe it's approximately $80,000 out of our department that covers that expense.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, this is something I would like to look into with my colleagues with the budget in general. So, Ms. Earle, I'd like you to circle back with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Prince. And this is not intended to hurry Mr. Tao or Ms. Jalali, but I just want to point out that it is 11 o'clock. Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. Chief, one of the things that folks were concerned about was during the civil unrest and the amount of damage that had been done, especially in Ward 1. So can you give us some brief detail on how many officers you have out there that even that number of officers out there, still we took a lot of damage. And so I want to hear about that. I want to hear about if with the reduction in the police, how do you think we would handle another civil unrest? Nobody wants that, but if it does happen, what kind of strain would it have on the city and the force?
Councilmember Tao, thank you very much for the question. We have actually organized a unit within our department, specifically led by Commander Axel Henry, investigating the extensive looting, the arsons. We've been working with the federal partners with that, and the damage to properties throughout our city. We have identified many people who have taken this tragic incident, which occurred in Minneapolis, to use to their own personal benefit, to loot our businesses, and hopefully we will have many more charges forthcoming on that. However, we are concerned about how do we continue to make sure that we're protecting our community. We know next March is going to be a very challenging time. We don't know what the future holds with the verdicts after the killing of George Floyd. So we are preparing with all of our regional partners to make sure that we're well positioned to keep everyone in our community safe. That planning is ongoing, and I'm willing to meet each and every one of you individually on how that planning is going. But I want to make sure everybody understands that we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure this doesn't happen again in our city.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Jalali and then Ms. Yang.
Thank you. It's been talked about a lot, just the opportunities we have to diversify our police force. And I do want to caution that it's just not a guarantee that having more officers of color is going to result in better treatment of people of color by the police. I would certainly argue it's a factor, but we've seen very diverse police forces be very brutal towards residents of color and folks more likely to be in interaction with the police. So we should be asking about results with that alongside of just the existence of them. I think that's an important point as we're talking about LECPA. The question I have is about something not in the presentation, but that has been raised to me by multiple advocates in the community and partners within Ramsey County. Chief Axel, I'm curious to understand better the recently dissolved juvenile unit that was working well to treat young people who were caught up in the justice system and in arrests by having a more developmentally appropriate approach to their brain chemistry and their youth level, and making sure that they weren't being interrogated like adults, and helping to de-escalate those interactions and support the overall goal of diversion and not facilitating young people who are getting caught up in the justice system at an early age. And there's just a lot of dismay and disappointment that this work isn't going to continue. And I'd like to better understand why that was done and what the plan is to replicate or support the goals of that, which I think are strongly supported and are actually a proven practice that was working well and isn't receiving support anymore. So could you speak to that?
Councilmember Jalali, thank you very much for that question. I'm actually very excited to talk about this. What we've done is taken a unit specifically designed to process juvenile offenders into the criminal justice system with 7 investigators. And specifically, we had a jail at our headquarters in St. Paul here, only for juveniles. I closed that jail down. I don't believe that incarcerating juveniles who come into the criminal justice system in the St. Paul Police Department is the way to go. So we are training our entire 140 investigators in the St. Paul Police Department to the standards and the acknowledgement and understanding of how important it is to make sure that we are treating our juveniles with every bit of reform that's needed, making sure that we are not criminalizing minor offenses, and making sure that we continue to work with the JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, keeping people out of specifically juveniles out of the criminal justice system. Back in the late, it was 2008, under the leadership of Commissioner Carter from Ramsey County, they have reduced juvenile incarceration by 85% since then, and juvenile crime has not gone up significantly. So I'm a big champion of alternatives to detention, and having a jail in the St. Paul Police Department just wasn't in line with the values that I have related to that topic.
Well, I appreciate the chance to hear more about that, and I might ask you some follow-ups, but thank you for addressing it here as it relates to the budget. And I think that in general, when we look at who's getting caught up in all the different interlocking systems of oppression in our community, it is disproportionately young people. So I am interested in what we're doing to support them. And when I see programs within SPPD or outside of it when I see SPPD doing community engagement work and think about, how we could better hire young people of color to be doing outreach outside of the police department, or to be supporting reaching folks in other ways, like the Community Ambassadors Program and some of the other initiatives, that's an area of great interest to me. So I appreciate the chance to learn more, and I'll be following up. But thanks. I'll let us keep moving here.
Thank you.
Ms. Yang. Ms. Yang, if you're speaking, I think you may be on mute. There you go.
Yes. Okay, do you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Chief Axe, so I wanted to acknowledge that I know the community's first public safety initiatives like Healing Streets, Community Ambassadors doesn't fall under your budget or department, but I was really surprised to see that not be touched on so much in the presentation here, because I feel that it's actually a really deep investment that our city is making to really, push toward a community-based public safety method for our community. And I just don't see public safety, as just a one-off solution. I think that it's a really deep intersectional issue that we need to talk about, and it's why we've made these investments. And I think that it actually would bring a lot of benefits, to our community and also to the police department itself. And so I wanted to say that, just naming that, I feel, if in future presentations that you do give to us, I wouldn't want to see this acknowledgement or even just a brief slide about how these initiatives actually benefit the department and also city be left out. And so I would like to see you, bring that forward if you do come in front of the council again. And just, in saying that, I do want to understand a bit about why that wasn't really touched on, because I feel that, if people are seeing this presentation and they see that, for example, 911 calls are increasing, or maybe a certain violent crime has increased, but yet we don't actually talk about the investments we make in something like the Community First public safety initiatives. It makes people, first, I feel it really traps people in the social construct that our police officers are here to save us and solve every single problem and issue that we have in our community. And then they only get stuck, in that one solution that we see, hasn't actually been working for our communities for decades and centuries already, and that we need to push for a more visionary, a solution around this. And then also, I think it just overall, shows people, or kind of communicates to people, hey, the council or even our mayor and city, we're not doing enough. And so I don't want that to get lost at all in this. And so that's why I feel this is so important. Can you share whether you see the Community First public safety initiatives as a deep benefit to the police department and to the issues that we are facing? And Can you make sure that in your next presentation you actually touch on this?
Yeah, Councilmember Yang, thank you very much for that observation. And we are deeply engaged and have been for many, many years with our partners. We know that prevention and intervention, it goes hand in hand with the 911 response that we do. The list of units that we have developed over the years in our department, from our Coast unit co-responding with our social workers, making sure we're treating people with dignity and respect, working with Mayor Carter's Community First Public Safety Initiative hand in hand. Every single Monday, we have a group of people working on these issues with the community ambassadors. And a matter of fact, the community ambassador funding is through our department. So we work hand in hand. We have a foundation and history going back decades in this department with strong, trusting relationships with all of our communities. And apparently, I need to spend a little more time with you, Councilmember Yang, making sure you understand all of the proactive, thoughtful approaches the St. Paul Police Department is doing now and into the future.
And if I may, Ms. Yang and Chief, one of the challenges that we always face when we're in budget season, and I think especially this COVID year, and particularly with Ms. Yang, this being Ms. Yang's first budget year, is often what we've tried to do is have our policy conversations where we look at the the overlapping entities that are working on youth engagement, or are there other parts of city work that overlaps, or policies that we want to engage on in the springtime, with the expectation that in the fall we'll see those priorities that we identified in the budget. And when we come to the budget, we're really talking about the numbers and trying to establish a levy limit and a budget that we were going to move forward with. And this year we didn't have the benefit of having so many of those policy sessions in the spring as we normally do. That would help us set up that those policy conversations and those budget priorities, which is fairly unusual. So it's hard to know in these presentations like how far into the policy we want to go, especially in these initial conversations about what's the quick rundown so that we can pass a levy limit. So I recognize those challenges there too, but at the same time, I appreciate very much, that none of these budgets really exist in a vacuum, and that we have to recognize the array of services that add up to public safety. But at the same time, we're looking at the police budget. So trying to navigate that line is really is kind of one of the challenges that we often do have when it comes down to the kind of numbers and dollars and cents and budget time. So I think that as we move forward in this budget season, trying to knit those things together will help us, make the kind of decisions that we want to make and set priorities as we head into 2021 and beyond. So I appreciate the question, and also just an opportunity to kind of acknowledge the challenge of policy versus budget, recognizing that they're so very much overlapped. So unfortunately, we really need to move on. It's 11:15 and we have two more departments that are here to share presentations with us today, and I'm going to have to trim those both way back. We will meet with the St. Paul Police Department again in October, and there are several follow-up questions. And as always, as we have questions that pop up along the way, we can certainly send them to Holly, send them to the chief, and get answers on questions so we can make budget and, to Ms. Yang's point, policy decisions and recommendations as we close out this budget season. So I feel like we could ask you questions for about 5 more hours, Chief. But I really appreciate getting this overview as we're heading into the levy limit. And I just want to remind my colleagues that we were set to establish a levy limit today, but we are not actually required by law to do that. So if we feel more time is warranted, that's a discussion that I'm open to having. So as we're thinking about this, we squeeze ourselves a little bit by making that choice, but it's something that we do have the option to do. So with that, I am going to thank you, Chief, for your presentation today. If you have a closing comment, go ahead, and then I'm going to move on to Ms. Jensen.
No, I just want to thank you all for your service. You all have a tough job to do, and I appreciate the work that you do. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Chief. We appreciate you, your team, your force, and the work that you're doing as well. And we look forward to working with you on this year's budget. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye. Director Jensen, we have put you on hold for quite a while here. We're going to move on to Hero. We can push our budget meeting time a little bit here, but we will try to get through your slides. And again, we'll ask questions along the way. I apologize to my colleagues for missing a few questions along the way last time. I'm tuned in now. I got it. So we'll turn things over to Director Jensen from Hero. Welcome.
Hi, welcome, council members. I'm going to run through our budget. I know that we're short on time, but I think that context is important. As a new director, I want to start out by just talking about the mission, values, and our strategic direction. During the spring and summer of this year, we went through a strategic planning process. When I came to the department, one of the first things that I did was to kind of try to level set. I did some listening. I also went through and evaluated all of the previous strategic plans and found that one of the concerns I had was that it's hard for our department to move forward if we're not all on the same page and that we're not all looking at the pillars and values that the city has. So Hero's mission, as you can see, we truncated that a little bit. It was very long, but serving St. Paul residents and businesses by advancing justice and equity through education, advocacy, and enforcement. I think it's really important that we understand the role of Hero. Hero is very much, you can go to the next slide. Thank you, Lee. Hero is very much about holding the city and our communities accountable for making sure that the most vulnerable in our communities is able to have access to the resources that the city has. And so we went through a really good strategic planning process and we came up with values of trust and accountability, community inclusion, openness, and continuous improvement. One of the things that came out of our strategic planning process, you can go to the next slide, was that Hero really needed to step back and look at how we do things, how we are training and the tools that we give our employees. Also understanding what Hero does. We're a kind of hodgepodge of a bunch of different things. And when the department was created some years ago, there really wasn't a lot of work to bringing those different units together. So defining Hero and telling our story, and then really setting standard best practices. I have a whole lot of things in our department. You can to the next slide. And so through our process, we identified a really practical vision. One of the things that we want to have or do is radical customer service, engagement-based enforcement, comprehensive, effective, and efficient reporting mechanisms, employee-centered planning, a holistic finance strategy, breaking down some of those silos, smart and integrated technology, which obviously during COVID has become critical for us to be able to do any outreach and active community engagement. So these are things that we talk about, but I think are critical. Majority of Hero's funding, like many departments, comes out of the general fund, but we are only 1.16% of the city's budget. You can go on. One of the things that we did in 2020 because of COVID is that we had to come up with a lot of, as every department, we had to come up with $247,000 to meet our budget target. We had $75,000 in anticipated revenue shortfall. We had $20,000 of unbudgeted interpreter expense, and then $118,000 in unanticipated employee expenses, which come to the same things that I suppose every department has. Next slide. Yes. Councilmember Naker. Sorry.
Oh. Council President, with your permission.
Sorry.
Ms. Naker.
Thank you. I just I just put my hand up a second ago. Thank you, Director Jensen. Just on the interpreter costs, I thought that those were borne by individual departments that requested them. Does HERO have its own interpreter costs that it has to take on?
We hired an ADA coordinator last year prior to me coming on board, and that our ADA coordinator is actually a deaf employee. And we have to provide as an accommodation, obviously, interpreter services for our ADA coordinator. And that comes out directly out of my budget. It's my employee. And so when I came into the department, that was not budgeted for, in which it turns out it was about $20,000 of unbudgeted interpreter expense.
Thank you. Interpretation for an employee within the department.
Yes.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Yep.
Ms. Prince.
Yeah, my question is, Ms. Jensen, will you be getting any CARES Act reimbursement for 2020 expenses, liabilities related to COVID?
Yeah. So the only real reimbursement that we may be able to see is for our procurement work. But a lot of that, it turns out, is work that we would normally have to be doing. So we have not anticipated any reimbursement to offset costs at this time. At least that's not what we have any in our budget.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Our 2020 budget changes, the savings, we cut $68,000 from our material and supplies, of which we have a very, very small budget. $240,000 is really being taken from vacancies, and I'll talk about that more extensively. $42,000 in salary needs were things that we were able, because of certain vacancies and changes in our staff, were able to use. And then $165,000 actually came out of to offset costs of our employers coming out of some of the special ones that we have. Next slide. So here's our current vacancies in 2020. You can see from this slide that we've got pretty much every department every division, is being impacted by vacancies. So I think if you have questions, we can go to the next slide. Some of the new initiatives which you all have funded is our labor standards team, earn sick, safe time, and minimum wage implementation. Minimum wage implementation just started in July 1st, but we've obviously been ramping up for that. And then earn sick and safe time is actually something that's been at the forefront during COVID because of a lot of different issues that have come up around that. Unfunded, sorry.
Ms. Snaker.
Thank you. So going back to that vacancy slide, I appreciate your mentioning, Director Jensen, that
Ms. Snaker?
Yes, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, sorry. I appreciate your mentioning that we really fought hard to invest in additional labor standards investigators. I know that was a huge discussion in last year's budget setting process. Am I understanding correctly from this slide that those positions, at least one of them has never been hired and that another one has been vacant since May?
Yes. So actually what happened is when I started, we had 2 people in labor standards, and there was a funding for 2 more people. When we had an employee leave through attrition, and so I filled a labor standards position with that. However, we have 2 positions that one remained open through 2020, and the other one remained open since 5/21. So technically, we have 4 positions, but 2 are open at this time. You're getting a little ahead of me, but the one of those positions will be filled in early 2021. So going into the 2021 budget, I can explain like what those these vacancies, all of them will not be held open going into 2021. This
Okay.
is just for 2020. Sorry.
Right. I just think I do want to talk about that because I think the mayor had originally proposed 3 positions and we had really fought hard to increase that to 4. And I think what I'm seeing is that the proposal is to eliminate one of those positions. And so we would be back at 3, even though we had worked so hard to try to get that up so we could enforce earn sick and safe time and minimum wage. So I just want to talk more about that as we move on.
Yeah, no. Actually, we can. Yes, absolutely. Unfunded. So I think this is important because one of the things that I've learned going into this is that there are mechanisms or ordinances that are passed that impact our work flow. One is the conversion therapy ban, which was passed and we're fully in support of, but understanding that there was no money that came along with that and that enforcement has to pick that up. Our investigators have to pick that up. The downtown commercial district is also something that while it may not fall under our traditional planning or compliance, the reality is that it will impact our workflow. And then last year I understand that there were community outreach partnership programs or projects that originally were, I believe, supposed to be something that would maybe be managed through PED, but our department is currently managing those projects. And so those are again, projects that my compliance people are managing, but we do not receive any administrative funds for those. Next slide. For our 2021 budget, here are all the things that we have to fund out of that. Obviously, my budget, labor standards, contract compliance, procurement, human rights, equity is now moved into human resources, PCR and the MBDR. Next. Similar to what the chief and every department I'm sure comes to tell you is that the majority of our expenses in our department are employee expenses. We only have $500,000 in other expenses. And if you go to the next slide, of the $500,000 for our non-personnel, the major spending categories are $293,000 of that is set aside for our minority business development. $55,000 is our compliance management software, which is required for us to do our cert, to do Davis-Bacon and all of the compliance that we need to do as required by law. The equity initiatives are, again, going into the human resource department. It was in Hero for a while, and then fixed costs of PC replacements.
Ms. Naker has a question, and before we pop to that, could you just explain really quickly what minority business development, what do we do with that $300,000?
Yeah, so those are grants that we give to community partners to work on small and medium-sized businesses, as well as training for underrepresented groups. And so this year with my MBDR fund, we had for the first time a RFP process that we put out for community partners to work with community partners to set up these training programs around things like construction, things like construction projects, pipelines for training for different groups. So we send that money with the community. It's not money that per se keeping in our department.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm asking, obviously supportive, but just trying to sometimes understand the difference between, the work that we're doing here, the work that we're doing in PED, and the work that we source out to, say, Neighborhood Development Corporation through our STAR funds or et cetera. So.
Well, and to be honest, my understanding from this is that the MBDR money, the Minority Business Development money, used to be in a special fund. It was moved to the general fund just in the last year. Just in 2020. So it used to be part of a special fund. So what was interesting about it was that when I asked, when I came in and we reviewed the MBDR fund, there was money sitting there, but nobody, or at least we had been using it, some of it, but hadn't really had a process in how we were using that money. And so now we've got an RFP process that has opened it up so we're increasing the types of organizations we're working with in the community.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Naker.
Thank you, Council President. Similar question. Director Jensen, can you speak to what the mayor's equity initiatives are that those $30,000 pay for?
That is really it was the chief equity officer's budget. So the chief equity officer's budget was in our budget because prior to a chief equity officer in HERO, all the equity initiatives were done in HERO or through HERO. So my understanding is that the previous director, several of the previous directors, but in particular, the director not prior to me, but the one before that, that HERO was responsible for doing racial equity training throughout the city, and that money sat in our budget. When the chief equity officer position was created, then that money stayed in HERO, but it was spent doing the citywide racial equity framework work.
And just as a quick follow-up, Council President, do you know if those dollars are intended? I know the chief equity officer position is vacant. I'm not sure whether or not that's intended to be filled. I know we're freezing hiring. Do you expect that the $30,000 will need to be spent in 2021, or can that be cut?
For me?
Right.
I would assume that would still need to be spent because there's citywide equity initiatives that are done with that funding.
Okay, so irrespective of whether or not the chief equity officer is in place, those dollars would be used by your department. Okay.
Yeah, because they were used by our department before the chief equity officer came into place.
Okay, and maybe we can just get a little follow up on that particular, like how that breaks down. That would be great. Okay. I see Ms. Prince has a question.
Yep.
Thank you. Ms. Jensen, the Minority Business Development and Retention program, I believe, was in PED before HERO was created. This is not really a budget question. Last night I was in a meeting where I learned about a couple of Black-owned businesses that are really struggling as a result of the civil unrest and COVID. Is that something that I could refer them to?
Yeah, I think that, yes, just if you refer them to our department, one of the things that both procurement and compliance does is to work with small minority-owned businesses to get them access to our contracts, the contracts and how the city does contracting, as well as then what other initiatives clients might be working with in order to get connected. So also in compliance is our CERT, our CERT program. And I'm going to talk about those in a minute. So if we want to move ahead on the slide, sorry. Thank you. So we've already gone over the proposed budget change. The majority of how we will reach that is through our vacancy savings. We can go to the next slide. As you can see here, this is where I'm talking about in 2021, we will be filling one of the labor standards positions, but we'll be leaving them open. The reason for doing that and the impacts that it has to services is that while we have, ESST complaints and we're starting to get minimum wage, we hope that with 3 people, we'll be able to meet the needs because these are such new, minimum wage is so new, and trying to get complaints in the door and really looking at what flow is going to be like is something that we believe we can handle with an additional person. Although if something were to come up and something were to change, obviously would fill that. The other thing that we're trying to do, if you can go to the next slide, I think it should. One of the things that the reason that we made these types of decisions is we don't have any more money to cut in any of our non-employee funds. These vacancies allow us to maintain our current employees without layoffs or furloughs. And the way that I approached this was to really spread the impact across divisions so that no one team was crippled. And based on, you can go to the next slide. You can stay. You can. So one of the things that I thought was really important was for us to kind of understand where we're at with all of our different departments. So currently, compliance vendor outreach is monitoring. You can see here, opened 27 new contracts, closed 56 contracts, monitoring $83 million in activity, which includes the Ford site infrastructure, Ford site utilities, Waterford Day Project, Community of Peace Academy Charter School, and citywide. Let's see, I can't see the slide because of my hand. Sorry.
Ms. Jensen, I see that Ms. Naker has her hand up.
Yep.
Thank you. This is back to the previous slide. I remember that we had at one point seen data on how many days it took to process and close out, fully investigate a labor standards complaint. And it was a lot of days. I don't remember exactly how many. And that was part of why we felt it was so important that as we were adding all of this new social justice, labor standards legislation that I know we all feel strongly about, that we actually be able to enforce it and more importantly, educate about it. So I am concerned because again, I just want to clarify, it looks like we're losing that extra labor standards person that we fought to put in. Do we have data that shows that we are able to respond to these investigations and close them out in less time than we were seeing before, or that we'll be able to do the education necessary to make sure employers and employees know their rights with this new legislation?
Yeah,
it just is really.
If you want, concerning. I actually have that data on a slide. I can move forward to that slide if you'd like.
Okay.
There's. Do you want to?
You don't have to skip anything. If it's coming up, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
I want to make sure.
So we can go to the next slide. We are responsible for affirmative action and prevailing wage. You can go to the next slide. Procurement. The procurement department is managing 600 contracts, processing 50 purchase orders a week. We have 4 staff, including a deputy director, assigned to support emergency operations for pandemic and civil unrest. And we're facilitating the innovative design building procurement process for the $230 million St. Paul Water McCarran plant project. Next slide. Current state of human rights. Human rights, we have what I would like to say here is that we have seen an increase in the number of complaints, and for the first time for the department, normally we process about 41 maybe to 50 cases for the EEOC. This year we are on target to make 81 cases to complete investigation of 81 cases for the EEOC, which is almost double what we've done in the past. And we are becoming more efficient and effective at investigating settlement process and really going through and finally implementing a case management solution database that will be implemented by the year end. In 2017, there was an audit of the HERO department, and there were 2 findings that were really critical. One, that we decreased the time that we take to investigate both HUD cases and EEOC cases, and 2, that we implement a case management solution. Those things were not done prior to me coming on board. So one of the 2 things we have done is this really digging into and improving our investigation process and our communication with complainants, and then also finally coming up with a case management solution that will allow us to pull data on all of our investigations and not just relying on our federal databases. The other thing is training and using cross-functional roles between labor standards and human rights in order to ensure that they are being able to do the investigations and support each other when needed. Next slide. So current state of labor standards. Right now, there are 18 new complaints. They've closed 12. There are 9 COVID-related complaints that have been received, 15 open investigations with resolved 3, investigated or investigate 17 employers, conducted community partner outreach to over 300 community partners and agencies for minimum wage implementation for all employers, developing a staffing plan, conducted outreach and interviewed candidates for the Labor Standards Advisory Council, which are with there, and we are moving forward and we'll be able to bring that to council shortly to have that Labor Standards Advisory Council up and running. We still need representatives from Ward 5 and Ward 6. Is that it? Yeah. We really want to ensure that we have representation from across the city. So those are open, but we do have candidates that we will be interviewing in order to get the Labor Standards Advisory Council at full capacity. We did provide and worked very closely with our community partners as well as the council to provide COVID-specific ESST frequently asked questions and resources, and gave referrals to others who came forward with ESST to 14 outside entities if we didn't have jurisdiction or if there were needs for both employers and Claytons. And then we did report to council on the impacts of the COVID return to work and ESST ramifications. Is that what you were looking for, Representative Naker?
It sort of was. I know we need.
Councilmember Naker.
No, it's okay. Thank you. I know we need to move on. I at some point would love to see just the days to complaints closed, but we need to move on. So thank you.
Okay. The current. Oh, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say there certainly is time between now and the close of the budget year. I think that they are important questions for us to know the answers to. Yep. And I'm very apologetic. We've got a late start and we have a lot of ground to cover. So I hate when I feel like we're hurrying on the supported information, but we just still have another department to get through.
I know. No, I know. Yeah. Okay, so priorities for the department is to implement the process improvements, which will address some of the concerns you have around investigations, coming up with our really standard operating procedures that would allow us to track and manage our complaints, cross-functional training and collaboration, our MVDR fund management, really working on our robust supplier diversity program, and ultimately employee development, which allows us to do the work that we do more efficient and effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions from my colleagues at this time? All right. We obviously have lots of questions, but we have time too. So we will follow up through Holly directly with questions in advance of passing our budget. We appreciate the time it took to put together this presentation and the thoughtfulness. Again, as we said to the chief, these cuts are all very challenging to all of the departments, and but there's no easy answers here. So thank you for this budget update. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here, and we will shift gears and move on to OTC. I am not sure who is presenting, but I probably demoted you to an attendee. If someone needs to be upgraded, let me know.
This is Amanda Green-Genzel. I can drive for OTC.
Okay, I'm going to make you a presenter. There. And so, Amanda, you're presenting?
I am, yes. well, we're Sharon. I will kick us off.
Okay, I'm just not sure how to introduce you, so I'll say welcome OTC.
Thank you. Council President Brent Mullen and council members, thanks for your time today. I'm Amanda Green-Genzel, Communications and Digital Media Manager for the Office of Technology and Communications. And I'm joined by my leadership team of OTC, which includes Administrative Manager Joe Mendica and Deputy Directors Christian DeLoya and Cassie Johnson. I'll start by giving you an overview of what our department does. Oftentimes, people associate us simply with computers and the related services for employees, but we're much more than that. From managing the city's website to video production to GIS mapping tools and user experience consulting, we're a full-scale technology partner for city departments. Our entire approach can be summarized as making sure that we are investing our technology resources, talent, and dollars for maximum impact for our residents. In an effort to better prioritize our widespread and extensive work, we took time to define our service lines in order to better understand the cost associated with the services we deliver and the value that our services create. We identified 7 service lines to help us prioritize our work. They are security, connectivity, customer service, digital services, digital communications, data and performance management, and technology business management. If you'd like further information about the work included in these service lines, I encourage you to review the appendix of our submitted presentation. I'll now turn it over to Deputy Director Christian DeLoya, who will give an update on our 2020 budget and the COVID impacts.
Thank you. And if somebody's presenting, they are muted.
Good morning, and thank you, Amanda. Good morning, Council President Ben Rowan and council members. Like other city departments, COVID and civil unrest had an impact on the work that we do. As such, we had to reprioritize that existing work to do things like enabling a significant amount of staff to work remotely through the use of virtual private networks or VPN connections, along with two-step authentication, which adds additional level of security to the traditional username and passwords that we use. From the slide, you can see the pre- and post-COVID remote connections. It increased pretty significantly. We also deployed laptops to staff to enable for them to work remotely as well. And since we weren't able to meet all of those needs, we also created a process for people to request to bring their work computer, monitors, or other non-IT equipment home to use. For the Bridge Fund, we sent approximately 19,000 messages to applicants and provided data analytics and data normalization, which enabled applications to be reviewed and ultimately approved or declined. We created the Community Resource Line, initially known as the Language Line, for residents to call into for the COVID-related questions. Due to civil unrest, the city and surrounding areas also experienced an increased number of cyber attacks. The primary form of these cyber attacks is known as a distributed denial of service, with the goal of preventing residents, other constituents, and targeted entities from accessing websites, their data, and their data business systems. While the city has not had a direct data breach, some of our business partners cannot say the same. In case you haven't heard of it, Blue Leaks is a published law enforcement data from agencies across the United States. Any SPPD data associated with this breach came from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's web hosting provider, which had a data breach. Again, not from a city system. As it relates to digital communications, OTC has and continues to devote staff to the Joint Information Center, or JIC. We've also enabled several virtual meetings, such as this one, and roundtables with various community groups. In addition to the cost of overtime as it relates to this work, it has had a pretty significant impact on OTC's budget. Speaking of the 2020 budget, our budget savings were achieved by maintaining our existing staff vacancies. As it relates to the 2021 budget, I will now turn that over to Joe Mendica to present that information.
And Mr. Mendyka, if you're speaking, you are on mute.
Thank you, Council President Brennan. Thank you, Christian. In the interest of time, I want to simply make the point regarding our principles, our budgeting principles going into the 2021 budget process, that this year's public health, social, and economic crises have required us to focus on certain goals that are new. Of course, we've been asked to realize savings without an adverse impact to our workforce or our community. And also, the very context of this meeting demonstrates how 2020 has placed increased demands on technology and digital services, both for our residents and the organization. What has not changed is our focus on security, long-term planning, and the need to continually steward the talent in our organization to achieve the result our community needs. For 2021, we started with over $260,000 in increased labor costs. Working from base budgets, departments took on reduction targets from Mayor Carter. Before being able to achieve our department's reduction goal, we needed to account for nearly $210,000 in increased technology costs. This led to over $1.1 million in reductions in order to reach our net of over $911,000 in reductions. I'll address the details of those reductions in just a moment. Additionally, Mayor Carter requested that OTC provide a plan for improving our city's public-facing digital services. Deputy Director Cassie Johnson will speak to the details of that work shortly. Finally, funding was included for OTC for 3 new FTE to support technology services at the police department in order to redeploy sworn officers to duties that require law enforcement personnel. I want to note that OTC has absorbed significant reductions against our base budget, a nearly 10% cut after accounting for the increased technology costs. It needs to be noted that the additional funds for digital services and supporting the police department's technology work will be on top of maintaining a steady state across our technology portfolio. I won't walk through each line item, but there are some key items that I would like to address. First, under the increased technology costs, the city's under negotiation for the renewal of our Microsoft Enterprise contract. This includes the annual payments for our Microsoft Office, Outlook, Teams, and Skype telephone software. We last negotiated a 3-year contract that will need to be renewed in 2021. This is an important example of where OTC faces an unavoidable cost increase. We've been going through a discovery process with Microsoft to ensure that we're using our licenses in the most efficient way possible, auditing our accounts to make sure we're not oversubscribed, and looking at other ways to control this increase. However, fundamentally, we're going to need to move forward with the renewal. We know it, Microsoft knows it, and that will ultimately be reflected in the rate that they charge. The elimination further down of Microsoft Dynamics from our environment, however, reflects a savings that is being realized through long-term technology planning. This tool is used to create a variety of applications used by different city programs. OTC is engaged in a product rationalization process to identify lower value tools that can be replaced by other products already available in our software portfolio. We've identified the uses for Microsoft Dynamics, developed plans to replace them, and we'll be able to realize savings in 2021 due to this effort. This process not only helps us save money, it will also improve our ability to scale that sort of replacement over time. Finally, regarding our reductions, first, it's clear from this table that a great deal of our reductions were realized through eliminating vacant positions. This is a painful decision to make. OTC, through our planning work, has identified the work that could be accomplished through these roles. Nevertheless, this strategy best aligns with our principles. Additionally, we've had to take reductions in our technical training and third-party support budgets. Technology services require current skills and sometimes necessitate engaging with outside vendors who provide skills that it's not strategic or financially feasible for the city to maintain in our workforce. By taking cuts in both these areas, we do risk being unable to secure appropriate skills to provide support in the event of a system failure. This information reflects how OTC arrived at the reduction target set for us at the beginning of the budget process. Deputy Director Johnson will now speak to our strategy for utilizing the additional funding that the mayor has included in his proposed budget to improve our public-facing digital services.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mendyka, and thank you, Council President Benmoen and council members. As Joe indicated, OTC was asked to propose new investment in resident-facing digital services. We've been planning for and laying a strong foundation for digital transformation for the past 2 years, but the pandemic has accelerated the need for digital service delivery, both to ensure the safety of our staff and community members, and also to realize efficiency in business process and cost savings as we enter a period of increased financial pressures. We planned our investments in digital transformation by evaluating those leverage points where we can make smart investments of financial resources and align the right people and processes in a way that allows us to maximize our impact. Ultimately, we want community members to feel included, engaged, and have big love for our city when they engage with us online. We want to ensure that all residents and customers who want to do business online, and that's their choice, whether that's applying for a permit or submitting comments on a proposed park design, have that opportunity. Offering more digital services is an imperative during COVID-19, but these investments in digital transformation are also an enduring investment in meeting our community members where they are with the kind of service they've come to expect and find most useful and welcoming and accessible in the other parts of their lives. Through interviews with city staff and residents, a review of best practices nationally, and an audit of our website and digital properties, we've identified 4 areas that offer the greatest opportunity and value for digital transformation. The first is constituent services. Our residents need to be able to submit complaints, ask questions about city services, and do their business where and in a way that's accessible to them. In addition to easier access to city services, we need to be able to collect data about our residents' needs so that we can plan and provide a more efficient response to those needs. In economic opportunity, we want to leverage data and technology to support people seeking economic opportunities in the city of St. Paul, supporting businesses, residents, and job seekers during this time of economic recovery and beyond. In public engagement, we want to make sure that the public can be involved in the design of new policies, programs, and projects, acknowledging that that leads to better outcomes. And then in lifelong learning, we want to be able to support St. Paul Public Library, Parks and Rec in providing a wide range of programs and resources for lifelong learners of all backgrounds. And we want to align technology across departments to ensure all residents can support their learning goals. We've approached each of these focus areas by putting users at the center of our work, making sure that we're making smart use of data to make decisions and measure outcomes, and ensuring that we're weighing the equity impact of our investments with a focus on racial disparities and accessibility. So specifically, we believe that several modest investments in new digital applications and professional services will allow us to dramatically expand our digital services for a total investment in applications and professional support of $428,000 in 2021. These include investments in a more flexible and agile business licensing and permitting application that will allow us to offer more business services online and track our multiple touch points with customers so we can provide more responsive customer service. We will make significant improvements in our website to enable community members to ask and receive answers to frequently asked questions online. This work also has the dual benefit of allowing our call center staff in the city to be able to more easily access information so they can provide an efficient and consistent customer service experience for folks who call in and aren't doing their business online. We will make enhancements to our website and resident communication platforms that will allow us to communicate emergency or timely information more effectively to community members, drawing on learnings that we have from our support of COVID and civil unrest responses through the JIC. And we will increase our support for online service delivery of educational content through Parks and Rec and libraries. And now I'll turn it over to Deputy Director Christian DeLoya to discuss those investments in security and infrastructure that are required to support strong digital services delivery in the city.
Thank you, Cassie. Regarding security, OTC continues to assess the cybersecurity state of city systems to protect the integrity and availability of that information and minimize risks. We also want to recover quickly from any potential security incidents such as ransomware. And we want to build a citywide culture around cybersecurity where every city employee is part of keeping us safe. As for infrastructure, much like maintenance and upgrades to roads and other city assets, OTC needs to do the same with the city's IT infrastructure. This work will promote increasing demand for anytime, anywhere access for city staff to their data, preventing service disruptions, and increasing the need for communication and collaboration solutions. Now I'll turn it over to Amanda for some closing thoughts.
In closing, you can see the key takeaways here. We approached our initial reduction target using our guiding principles, and we were able to meet the initial reduction target. Mayor then asked us to make a proposal for how we would invest new funding in city's resident-facing digital services, which Cassie gave you an overview of that $668,000 digital transformation initiative. So at this time, we're happy to stand for any questions you may have.
I'll just reiterate the apology that we had to go through this really dense presentation so quickly. There is so much in here that I have questions about, and I think we're going to need to, continue this conversation not only in this budget process but next year as a policy conversation. I know I see there's some folks that have hands up, but I do want to just acknowledge that this simply isn't enough time to cover the investments that we're talking about making in this department, to cover the work that is happening, and recognizing that in order for us to create savings across the city, we'll have to lean and rely heavily on technology. So I really feel like this is a linchpin in this conversation, and a lot of times it ends up being sort of the tacked on ending, or and thanks to OTC too, and really it's a key piece of this budget. So I don't know. I'm going to look to my colleagues, but I just do feel like this is great information. It's good to understand where OTC stands going into our as we set our levy limit. But I do believe that we will have follow-up questions throughout this budget process, and we may want to just invite you back to another budget committee meeting to look to kind of deeper dive on some of these slides. I do see Ms. Naker's hand is up.
Thank you, Council President. I know we're completely out of time, so I want to second what you just said. I think OTC is one of the only departments getting additional dollars, and I have to admit I wasn't clear from this presentation what exactly the $668,000 in new money is going to do. And I noticed there was a lot of information on slides 26 through 28. I know a lot of my constituents have had major issues, not big love, unfortunately, accessing things that in 2020 and 2021, they really should be able to do online. So I think it would be great to have more information both about this year's initiative and then generally the work plan of OTC.
Thank you, Ms. Naker. I think just in anticipation of the levy limit, would we like to get a little more information on the $600,000 quickly? Is there a member of the OTC presentation group that could address that briefly with us? I see Ms. Johnson is nodding her head, but she's muted, so.
Sorry, trying to get off mute there. Amanda, can you move us to slide 14? Great, thank you. So this slide outlines the proposals that we're making for investing that $668,000. So as I mentioned, about $428,000 of that we have proposed for digital services that would include an investment in new business licensing and permitting application, as well as pretty significant changes to our website to enable customers to ask questions through the website, also being able to document some of that knowledge base to support folks who would be accessing like a call center if that's their preferred way of communication, and some changes to the way the website works to make it easier to push out information that's timely about emergency issues as we've experienced this year. So that's both website changes as well as integrating some of our communication platforms to work better together, and then increased support for online service delivery of educational content through Parks and Rec and libraries.
And Ms. Johnson, my understanding was that some of the police technology needs were being shifted over to OTC. Does that contemplate, any of this contemplate the addition of police tech work?
We are in the midst of planning around those changes. These specific investments that represent the new, the $668,000, don't reflect that staffing change. And we can provide more information in the next session about those plans. And so apologies again, in addition to what I talked about from a digital services perspective, those new digital services, business licensing and permitting, web and emergency communications, and Parks and Rec and library support also includes then those investments that Deputy Director DeLoya referenced that are really about building that strong foundation for digital service delivery, recognizing that we don't want to enhance digital service delivery while opening up our systems to security challenges or challenges with infrastructure and operations.
Okay, and I don't mean to sound glib, but if we're moving our police technology to OTC, we need to make sure that we're picking it up and not talking about it. So I want to make sure that we're clear what the plan is, because a lapse in that field is, I just want to be authentic about if we're transferring services from one department to the next, that the other department is picking it up. So I think that digging deeper into that in our budget season would be very important and helpful to me.
Yeah, and there shouldn't be a challenge around continuity of services. And we can talk more about the planning for specific staffing at our next session.
Okay, so obviously we will have follow-up questions, and we will want to maybe come through. We'll follow up through Holly with potential areas of this presentation that we'd like to hear more about, and then follow-up questions from council members and staff as well. So mostly because it's dense, it's important. We know that this work is really the spine of the work that we're doing in the city, and so we want to make sure we're taking care of that and that we know what's going on. So thank you. And again, sorry to rush you here at having 3 presentations on one day is just too many. It's just that simple. And we're kind of with our deadline of the levy limit, we were just trying to make sure that we heard from folks. So I do apologize for the truncated conversation, but let that no means be a reflection of our interest in your work. And we appreciate the budget presentation that you've put together for us today. So thank you so much, all of you, for the team presentation. We appreciate it. To my colleagues, we are shifting gears now quick. We'll mention again that today we are slated to set the levy limit at our 3:30 meeting with the library also slated at that time, and I believe HRA, although HRA might be next week. Mr. Tolbert, do you know, is that today or Ms. Houston?
Councilmember Brenmo, council members, the HRA is slated for next week.
Okay, I knew we had a conversation about that, and I, for some reason, forgot where we landed. So we do have a little time on that as well. So lots before us today at the council meeting, but that is a budget presentation for today. Please follow up questions through Holly for any of these 3 departments, and we are checking in with Holly on a weekly basis about the budget. So we will plan a return of the OTC for some follow up as well. And in addition to our regularly scheduled follow-up. So if there is no other business to come before us, I do apologize for adjourning us at 12:07 when we intended to adjourn at 11:30, but this is important stuff, and I appreciate folks hanging in there. So with nothing else, we will be adjourned. Thank you. Au revoir.
Thank you.